protagonist is easy in Wizard of Oz. The protagonist was Dorothy, just like Luke is the protagonist of Star Wars. Then we have the antagonist, who will skip for a moment. We'll move down to the reason character. We're also going to skip reason. We're going to skip emotion for a moment. And then we'll go down here to sidekick, and that's clear in the Wizard of Oz. That's Toto. Again, Toto, Cato, Tonto. Okay. Now we go down one more to the skeptic, and that's pretty clear. The skeptic is the cowardly lion. He doesn't think their plan can... I better just put lion instead of cowardly. There's no room for that. Okay. The lion, he doesn't believe their plan can succeed, and he keeps telling them that he doesn't think it can, and he's against the plans. He's the disbelieving opposer. That doesn't mean he doesn't want to help Dorothy. It just means that he's the disbelieving opposer in the story as far as their plans go. And then we have the guardian, who is also clear in Wizard of Oz, guardian, and that's Glinda, the good witch. She's very much Obi-Wan Kenobi. And finally, we have the contagonist. And the contagonist, we're going to leave blank again for a moment. So, let's zoom in a little closer, get about 4 of these at a time so we can really read them well. And we're going to talk about the first 4 here. Protagonist, Dorothy. Antagonist, we don't know yet. Reason, we don't know yet. And emotion, we don't know yet. Now we'll go down to the bottom 4. We know who the sidekick is, Toto. Skeptic is the lion. Guardian is Glinda. Who do we have left? Well, we've got the wizard, the witch, the scarecrow, and the Tin Man. All the other characters are kind of plot devices or incidental. And so basically we have 8 characters like we do in Star Wars who drive the whole thing, but now we need to put the scarecrow, the Tin Man, the wizard, and the witch. Let's do the scarecrow and the Tin Man first. Up here, in reason, who is reason, scarecrow or Tin Man? Well, first you might think, well, it's the scarecrow because the scarecrow is the one who always comes up with the plan. I'll show you how to get apples. I got a plan to rescue Dorothy. He's always got the plan. The only problem is, unlike Leia, the scarecrow is all over the place, more like Chewbacca. Okay, so something's not the same as Leia. Dorothy is like Luke, and sidekick Toto is like the robots, but here something doesn't work with reason. So now we're coming down to the emotion character, and we look at that and say, well, if the scarecrow was reason, although it doesn't feel right, there's something clunky, the emotion character would be the Tin Man. Well, he's the one who cries all the time. He's the one who wants to get a heart, just like the scarecrow needs a diploma. Tin Man needs a heart. So we put him in his emotion, but he's not quite like Chewbacca. Part of him is, half of him is, he responds emotionally, but the other half is that he's very controlled, more like Leia. So effectively what's happened is we have characters that, between the two of them, still represent logic and control and uncontrol and feeling. But they don't put them together the same way we did in Star Wars. So rather than having L-E-A-I-A. There we go. Leia. Okay, rather than having Leia here and over here Chewie, we find that the Scarecrow, S-C-A-R-E, Scarecrow, within him has the logic of Leia, but has the uncontrolled physical nature of Chewie. And here the Tin Man has the controlled nature of Leia, but the emotional part of Chewie, the feeling part of Chewie. So the Tin Man is kind of Leia on the outside and Chewie on the inside. Okay. What we've learned is that if you take the elements so that each one has an external and an internal, you can take it and switch it so they each still have an external and an internal, but they've swapped one in relationship to the other. This means that the characters are no longer archetypal. They're a little more interesting insofar as they can't be predicted. And as an author, you now have to describe this by showing specific scenes to show why the Scarecrow is not a typical reason archetype, why the Tin Man is not a typical emotional archetype. Another way of combining characteristics differently that we found in Wizard of Oz was with the antagonist and the contagonist. The antagonist might at first seem to be the witch. And that would put her in the same role as the Empire, the Grand Moff Tarkin. And then down here, we look at the contagonist, who would seem to be the wizard, who would be like a Darth Vader character, although we do get some of the same fear we have of Darth Vader, but the wizard doesn't really seem to be against them the same way. But remember, it's not who you're for or against, whether you hinder or not if you're a contagonist, whether you cause people to be tempted or not. Now the wizard, he doesn't hinder so much. He gives them a means out. The witch actually is the one who hinders, but she also tries to prevent. So the witch gets the prevent part, prevent or avoid, and the witch also gets the hinder part, or the hindquarters. No, she gets the hinder part, and prevent and hinder are both external. So unlike Scarecrow and Tin Man, which each still have an internal or external, but they've swapped them compared to the archetypes of Leia and Chewie, the witch, she gets both the external, which means, of course, that the wizard, he gets both the internal. He's the force for reconsideration because he makes them want to reconsider by all his fire and flame and scary stuff. And he's also the tempter because he tells them, hey, just get back in the balloon and go back to Kansas with me. When in fact, the conscience, Glinda, will tell you that you needed to learn on your own that there's no place like home. If she just hopped in the balloon and went to Kansas, she never would have resolved her personal problem. She needed to learn that on her own, not by some simple balloon trick. So the wizard now gets both the internal elements, and as a result, we don't see much of him in the story in The Wizard of Oz. We feel his influence, but we don't see him because his influence is all internal. As a result of this, we've now learned that when you create a story, there are elements smaller than archetypes. There's 8 elements, 2 each in 4 different dimensions, and they can be combined in many different ways in each of the dimensions to create much more complex characters. This means that you'll spend a lot more time in your story describing exactly what elements each character contains, so the audience can see that package and say, this package of characteristics, does it fare better or worse than the others in trying to resolve the story's problem? And therein lies the story's message. So the archetypes will suit you fine for an action story, a sci-fi story, a big thematic exploration, put more time into your theme, more in your plot, more in your genre. But if you want to focus on characters, you want to get out of the archetypes, break them into the elements, and arrange them in different ways that are much more interesting.